Hey, happy Sunday, happy Sabbath, everyone. I'm Woody, and we get to hang out today. I was doing a video at the front of church 2 weeks ago, and many of you said to me, hey, you're supposed to be working. And I was trying to figure out what Sabbath was, hanging out in a hammock for a little bit. Today, we're gonna really try to ask some good questions and think through, what does it mean to find rest in God? Does anybody in here have that completely figured out and you could be the master to guide all of us? Or how many of you more are like me, trying to every season, every week, figure out, God, help me to do this well? Well, here's where we're gonna start. I'm gonna jump into scripture right away at the very beginning so you hear from God's word and not just from me. If you got a Bible, open it up to Isaiah. This will be kind of our grounding scripture for the day. And I'm gonna read a portion of it from verses 13 to 14. Isaiah 58 says this: if you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's holy day honorable, and if you honor it by not going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, then you will find your joy in the Lord. And I will cause you to ride in thoughts and on the heights of all the land, and to the feast on the richest inheritance of the father Jacob. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. It's a beautiful passage, but man, it is a challenging passage. There's a couple if statements in there. There's these really sweet conditional clauses. And right away, I want to encourage you, don't feel guilty and shameful and try to be ready to defend yourself. Instead, will you do this? Will you open up yourself and say, God, if you got a better way for living than I'm trying to survive right now, I'm all ears. God, help me to know what you want me to do. Let me point out some of the conditional clauses that were in Isaiah 58. And there's actually 3 times that the word if comes up. The first one I didn't do a slide for, but I want you to hear what it is again. The first if is, if you keep your feet from breaking my commandment. Isn't it fun that the feet are highlighted at the very beginning? Because it's our feet that end up taking us places and moving us along and getting us into situations. And the question and the commandment there is, if you keep your feet doing the Sabbath. The second if clause is this: if you call the Sabbath a delight. That's kind of an interesting word to put in the word Sabbath, right? A delight. If you can talk about the Sabbath as something joyful, something fun, something you look forward to, if. And a third if you honor it by not going your own way, then, I love the then word, then you will find your joy in the Lord and will ride in triumph. Anybody like me got some things to work on thinking through Sabbath? You got it all figured out? You know what you're doing? You're ready to go? Here's what I know is probably in this room right now. There are some of you who are going, I don't know much about Sabbath, so I'm not even sure if I should be challenged. Today, you're gonna get some inside 101 heads up about Sabbath. Some of you have been following God for a while and you've gone through different seasons of life where maybe you have started to go your own way or try your own style of doing life well. And maybe today is gonna be a reimagining or a reawakening to why God has called us to something. You're probably not the only ones that need this. Our pastor, this last week, we prayed for him for a sabbatical. So Aaron is beginning what is considered an extended Sabbath. He's looking to find rest, delight, all this refreshment and clear vision with God so that he could lead us well. And so here's what I thought coming into this week. I knew you'd be stuck with me and I'd get to preach, right? that I'm like, if Aaron's gonna be thinking about Sabbath, resting and delighting in God, I think we should be thinking about it too, right? And so a couple months ago, I started studying again. I pulled out a bunch of old books that I've read on Sabbath, and I actually bought some new books on Sabbath. And as I was reading and preparing for this, because I know that we all need it, I started to realize something. In the new season I find myself in this last year, I have slipped into some bad habits, and I also need to be rethinking this a little bit. If this is actually gonna be something that I believe, then I need to figure out how to act it out. I'll give you the confession in my own life that I have going on. A bunch of you remember my daughter got married in March, the beginning of March. And in that season, there was a whole lot to do because I was the silly one that thought we'd save a ton of money and do a wedding in the backyard. But little did I know it'd be the coldest winter in Southern California that anybody can remember. And it snowed the week before the wedding. But before any of that happened, I was determined. I was saving money. By the way, all you wives where your husbands try to save money, you just look at them like they're ridiculous. Yes, that's how my wife was looking at me. But I was saving money. And at about 9 o'clock at night, one Saturday night, Sunday's the next day, I should be getting ready and what it means to slow down. At 9 p.m., not 9 a.m., I have a headlamp on doing real wheelbarrows of dirt from the front yard to the backyard, asking myself, was that a hernia I just felt? What am I doing? This is stupid. How much money did I save? That I really think as I have studied and prepared for today, I really felt like God was saying, bring this to the congregation. But I gotta be more honest, as I've sat in it more, I felt like God was saying, you need to reevaluate and you need to shift up some of your bad habits again. It's interesting, as we think about Sabbath, there's a few questions we'll try to answer today. What does rest look like? Is it a hammock or is it more than a hammock? Is it a hammock plus God or God plus a hammock? What does rest look like? What is Sabbath? What does healing, life-changing rest look like? I'm hoping you'll be willing to do what I asked you to do early on, and that was just to kind of open your heart, your soul, your mind, your body, and have listening ears to say, hey, God, if I'm not doing it the right way, if I'm run down, exhausted because I'm doing it all in my own strength, I'm listening. Tell me how to do it different. Maybe the best place to begin is this. I tried to come up with a definition for Sabbath. And I gotta confess something right here. When you read a bunch of authors and you try to come up with a definition, it just gets like a run-on sentence. But I did my best by a bunch of people that have influenced me and the scriptures have influenced me. And so if this feels meaty, don't worry, chew on it as I read it slow. And I think we'll figure it out as we go on, but I wanna give us a starting place. Here's what I came up for myself. Sabbath is a rhythm of one day a week when we stop and enter into true trust with God. In Sabbath, we intentionally cease from our work, both our accomplishing and our accumulating. I don't know if that connects with you, but that was the first part of a definition that I came up with. But I gotta tell you, I like other people because they're a lot shorter and to the point and cleaner than I am. And one of those is an author by the name of John Mark Comer. And all he did was translate the word Sabbath to help it be a simple definition. Do you know what the Hebrew Sabbath means? The word Sabbath means? It basically means stop. You could buy a big old stop sign and stick it in your house to remind you of Sabbath. To Sabbath means to stop. He said this, Sabbath is simply a day to stop. Stop working, stop wanting, stop worrying, just stop. There's a rabbi in the Jewish tradition that says this about Sabbath. 6 days a week, we wrestle with the world, wringing profit from the earth. On the Sabbath, we especially slow down and care for the seeds that have been eternally planted in our soul. And that means we need to be with God. Sabbath is this. Sabbath is a resistance to the busyness of our world that wants to make our minds and hearts run rapid. It really is kind of just a moment where we can slow down and admit our limits, but then also really start to celebrate and get excited again about the limitless love of God, the limitless care of God, and the limitless just absolute rest that only God can give. And it's in all this that I'm really hoping that we'll wrestle with what does it mean to engage for the first time? What does Sabbath look like as a part of our lives? Or for many of us to re-engage it and just go, man, I am in a real bad pattern right now. I got to shift it back up and get back to what God's called us to. And I use that word call because as I was getting ready for today, I really had to just kind of be reminded, God is always inviting me. God is always inviting you. You know, we hear the word command and sometimes we like bristle. We're like, don't tell me what to do. But this invitation is so significant because it's a life-giving invitation. And if we heed it, if we follow it, it absolutely can bring us a life that's different than anything we imagine. I don't know what it is, but I kind of feel like the Western church, as I watch us figure out the United States in 2023 and the economy and the opportunities that we have for fun and entertainment. And I think sometimes we take God's commandment for Sabbath rest and we take it a little bit more just as a suggestion. Like God might be saying, hey, for all you that are weak, that can't do it like the strong ones, you probably need a Sabbath. And we're like, God, I got this. I don't need to rest. I could do 21 days straight in a row, up at 5 and all the way till dark. I'm as strong as an ox. By the way, I don't want to be an ox. Have you ever seen an ox, right? But sometimes I think we live in such a manner that it's almost like we're taking it as a suggestion rather than being reminded, no, God made us. God knows us. God wants us to have life. And so it's in all that what I'm hoping is that we won't copy the frenzied craziness of our world, that we won't be on that road weary, endless success, obsessed kind of lifestyle and be willing to do something a little bit different. Because for most of us, if we try to imagine Sabbath, I think we think of Saturday and Sunday as two potential days to get everything done that we don't get done when we're being paid to do something. And we've built out those 2 days so full that we somehow still never even get everything done in that. And we get to Sunday night and we're still exhausted and we just go, no worries. I'll just absolutely fill myself up with caffeine in the morning and somehow I'll survive another week, right? This is real stuff because we are trying to figure out what does it mean to actually do life with God. Church, I really do believe that I love God and want to follow God. But I think I got to confess, there are weeks and months that I look at myself and I go, my actions, my convictions, and my difficult decision-making don't really show how bad I love God and actually just want to sit with God and be with God. True. I'm hoping this will remind you and stir you again for what God wants to do, and that is give you life. Listen to this quote by Andre Sullivan. He says, we have become perhaps the most emotionally exhausted, psychologically overworked, and spiritually malnutritious people in history. And I ask the question, what will change so that we're not so addicted to speed, to pressure, to trying to unconsciously run faster than our bodies were ever intended to run? We'll take a real look at life, and I will try to be honest so that you don't think I have this all figured out. It's why I sat in the hammock 2 Sundays ago. It's why I had all my books out on Sabbath. I'm trying to re-engage again. What does this look like? Let me give you some funny confessions that just show how little all of us actually believe this at moments. How many of you guys have ever had a strawberry shake at Chick-fil-A before? Yeah? Oh, I saw a bunch of kids' hands go up there real quick. How many of you have ever been a little frustrated and mad that you can't get one on Sunday? Do you realize that we're actually punking a company that's trying to be good and do the Sabbath? or Hobby Lobby or anything like that. Like, do you realize we have example that there are companies out there that are like, yeah, we could make another dollar. We could be open another day of the week. We probably could financially expand, but they're trying to live out what does Sabbath look like and not do that. I was trying to maximize my own life because, we love expediency. We like convenience. Does anybody else like convenience and expediency, or am I the only one? How many of us are addicted to expedience and convenience? I was at church. This was only 2 weeks ago. I was at church and I was headed home because I was flying out that week to go be a part of my nephew's wedding. And I was like, oh man, I got to pick up my shirt from the cleaners, the laundromat. I'll just do that real quick on my way home, and pulled in the parking lot and pulled in the parking spot, and I looked up and it said closed. And I'm like, oh man, I totally fit this into my day. And all of a sudden, everything I've been reading and preparing for this sermon today came back to me, and I'm like, oh my word, I know the family that owns this laundromat. I know that they're Christ followers. I know that they are intentionally trying to live out Sabbath. And here I am in my own busyness and my expediency, expecting them to be open so I can have a convenient moment to get something out of the way. I don't know if you're like me, but I need this message so bad today because I want God to keep shaping in me what it means that in Him, that in the living God, there is rest beyond anything I can imagine. There's consequences to this if we don't do it, right? Do you know what those are? There's a cost. It's called burnout. It's called depression. It's called high blood pressure. Those of us out there, any of us take a high blood pressure meds, you can't ignore your body and just go, there's always a medication to overdo that, right? Sometimes I wish doctors would just go, yeah, we got all kinds of medicines and we probably could help you out. But the truth is, if you just did Sabbath and rested in God, you'd drop your anxiety, your blood pressure, your exhaustion, and everything else, right? That in all of these things, there is a God that's calling us out to true life. How many of you have ever driven over the Grapevine before? You know what I'm talking about? The other Central Cal area, right? Bakersfield and Fresno. What temperature is it like during the summer up in that area and on the Grapevine? Hot, real hot. How many of you have ever been in a car, whether it's yours or somebody else, going up over the Grapevine and a warning light goes on? Am I the only one that's ever had an old car or a bad car? What's the warning light usually on for? Overheating. The radiator is angry at you and it doesn't want to keep going. I can remember one story specifically being in a car with my dad, and basically it felt like the whole family was like, just lean forward. We can get over the top. We can make it. I know we can. No. You see cars off the side of the road, steam coming up. You and I cannot ignore the warning lights of our bodies, our minds, our hearts, and our souls. I want to give you a chance to self-reflect before we read some more scripture. I mentioned John Mark Comer and a book that he wrote, The Endless Pursuit of like Busyness, Craziness, and Everything Else. And the funniest thing is, my son had this book and he was joking around with me, knew when I was getting ready to preach the sermon, and he said, Dad, I was too busy to read that book. I didn't have any time to read it. But he has a chapter in there on Sabbath, and in there he has the difference between restfulness and relentlessness. And I want you to look at these two lists for a second. Look at the different words and what they mean, and I want you to maybe start asking yourself this question. Which list describes you more? I know some of you will want to do it one at a time and go, well, I was too positive here, one negative here. Like, this isn't a moment for you to try to get a good score, okay? This is a moment for you to be honest. Are you more about enjoyment or more about envy? Is there more slowness or more hurry in you? Is there more trust or more worry, more peace or more anxiety? Is there work that makes sense and adds and contributes to stuff? Or is work just something that you do to accomplish and accumulate and make ourselves feel better? It's a powerful list to get us ready for these scriptures where God gives us the basics of what he calls us to. If you got a Bible, open up to Genesis chapter 2, very beginning of the whole story that we're aware of. In Genesis chapter 2, verses 1-3. Many of you know the seventh day. You know what God did at the end of creation. It says this: by the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all of his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. I gotta tell you, this is a Sunday school little kid moment for me. When I was reading this again and trying to come at it with fresh eyes, because I've read it so many different times, for some reason, the first thing that popped into my head, because I really am a juvenile most of the time, was what a little kid might say if they heard this. Why did God rest? Was he exhausted? Was he tired? Were his muscles sore? Did he need a break from all that creating? Have you ever really thought about it for a second? Why did God rest on the seventh day? If we understand the Hebrew word Sabbath as being the word stop in Hebrew, I've only given you the first half of the meaning of what that Hebrew word infers. It also implies delight. Do you know God didn't rest because God was exhausted? Our God doesn't get exhausted. Our God has endless creativity, endless energy, endless ability to watch out for his creation. But on the seventh day, God decided, this is good, and I am going to delight in it and enjoy it. And in many ways, what God did was set in the DNA of creation what it would look like for you and I to figure out stopping and delighting as well. Have you noticed that in many ways, this is something that can shape how we just map out our whole existence? We kind of do it. We consider going to church a Sabbath, and then we rush out of here. By the way, I would love to put a camera in church. This place drains out so fast. It's shocking. I don't know if it's because there's some restaurant we're all fighting to get to, or you know what I hope? Wouldn't it be so great? This place drains out so fast because everybody can't wait to get to Sabbath. I doubt it. Everybody can't wait to get out of here because they got 50 things they got to do before Monday morning, right? Let's just be honest. God rested in order to delight. God delighted in Adam and Eve and in relationship. God delighted in what he made. Listen to some of the commandments about Sabbath. In Exodus chapter 20, in Deuteronomy chapter 5, in Leviticus chapter 19, we hear the 10 commandments. And I just want to read the Exodus version of it. It says this about the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. This is a commandment, not a suggestion. And I got to remember that because so often I only take it as a suggestion. Here's what's so sweet about this commandment. Can I just say it again as clear as day? God is giving us a command that brings us life. Think about this for a second. What type of food do you really enjoy? What type of activities do you enjoy? If you mentioned ice cream, donuts, or tri-tip, right? This is what kind of commandment this is. And the Lord your God says, have yourself a feast day and eat all the ice cream, tri-tip, and donuts you want to. There is a lot to celebrate. This is what type of commandment this is if there are certain things you like to do. The Lord your God commanded you, as long as it's not about accomplishing, going crazy and everything else, go for a hike. Don't try to conquer something so you could prove to yourself you could do 20 miles, but what's it like to go for a hike and go, I'm listening to the birds, I'm seeing the plants, I'm seeing how God's creation is taken care of, and I get to enjoy it. Think about this Sabbath commandment as life-giving, not life-ceasing. And it's pretty interesting because I told you that we were reading out of Exodus. Do you realize in Exodus chapter 20, the Israelites were already out of Egypt? In some ways, this is like a, hey, Egypt, hey, Pharaoh, what you did to the people of God no longer is a reality. Egypt and Pharaoh enslaved the people, made them work 7 days a week. And when God got them and freed them and they were in the desert, God said, I'm about to put a new identity in you. People are gonna see you as something different. You don't need to labor and toil and be out of control. You are fighting resistance against the economy, against Egypt, against being enslaved and mastered. Take a Sabbath. This stuff is so challenging for me and I need so much help with it. I know you got it figured out, but I don't. I read Isaiah chapter 58. I'm not gonna read it again, but in Isaiah chapter 58, verses 13 through 14, can I give you what the context of it was? The people of Israel were building the temple. Now you would think God would want his temple to hurry up and get built. But God was speaking through the prophet Isaiah, and God was telling the prophet Isaiah to remind the people, yeah, you're doing something important. You're building my temple, maybe the sanctuary, maybe a church. You're building a space. But it was almost like God was saying, do you realize though, sacred time and sacred space with me is even more important than the building I've commanded you to build called the temple. And so in Isaiah, it's pretty sweet when God is basically saying, I know you're excited to build the temple, but it is more important to spend time with me, and you're human and you have bodies and you have minds and they need to rest. Don't work on the Sabbath. In Mark chapter 2, we hear a little bit about the Sabbath and Jesus. And what's so kind of like informing for me is this: Sabbath is mentioned about 58 times in the New Testament. There's nowhere in there that Jesus, who comes and is now the new sacrifice, no longer need a lamb. There's no place in there where Jesus is like, hey, because I came, now you can work 7 days a week or be busy 7 days a week. I've come and made all things new. Who cares about Sabbath? Like that never happened in the New Testament. Jesus found times to slow down. Jesus found ways to experience the Father. Jesus got isolated and alone. But there were some really key things, and two of them are in Mark chapter 2 and Mark chapter 3. In Mark chapter 3, Jesus healed on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees were not having it. They had a huge list of rules that they wanted Jesus and the disciples to keep. And then in Mark chapter 2, verse 27, the disciples were walking through a field. And I don't know if you've ever seen wheat or barley in a field, but it's got a stalk, and then at the top are all the grains. And what they did is they walked through and they grabbed it and they rubbed it between their hands, and then the barley or the wheat would come and they'd stick it in their mouth and they'd just chew it. And it almost gets gummy like a little bit of like old-fashioned gum in a sense. And the Pharisees got mad at the disciples for doing that because this was considered work and they should have been keeping all the rules. Listen to what Jesus said to the Pharisees. It's so shaping for how we do life. He said this, then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath. As I talk about all this, there is no intent on my part at all to drive us back to a list-keeping set of rules so we could feel really saintly like we're better than everybody else because we Sabbath. But I also don't want us to totally chuck the deep command and the drawing that God's calling us to go, God made us something. How do we receive this gift? The Sabbath is often described as a gift. I don't know how you receive gifts or what you do with gifts. Sometimes when we get a gift, if we don't understand it, we're like, thank you very much. All right, they're gone. I'll set it on a shelf, and maybe someday I'll take the time to learn the directions or figure it out. I'm sure it could be great, but not today. Sometimes we get a gift and we're like, cool, I'll try it for a week. That was good enough, I'm on to the next thing. But sometimes we get a gift that shapes the remainder of our life, and it has something that engages us forever. And that is the type of gift that God has given us in the Sabbath. How have you received this gift in the current season that you're at? There's so many different seasons and requires so much engagement and wrestling with. It's one thing when you're young. It's another thing when you're a young adult. It's another thing when maybe you get married or have kids. It's another thing when your house is empty. It's another thing when you're single. Another thing when you're married, where you're retired. Like, I haven't found anybody that has figured out Sabbath at one moment and it's been sweet and easy to do the rest of their life the same way. It requires an engagement and a re-engagement to ask the question, is what I'm doing on my Sabbath day engaging God, worshiping God, refreshing in God, renewing in God? And do I enter the beginning of a week in a different mind frame because I have been resistant to accumulating, acquiring, and doing all the things that Pharaoh, Egypt, and those things that want to master me do? It's really beautiful to kind of see what can happen if we live in intentional ways. Some of you may be really wise and have done your study. In the Jewish tradition, Sabbath was actually a Saturday because the beginning of the week was a Sunday. But then Constantine in 321 AD decided that it wasn't good for the sun god to be worshiped. That was a pagan holiday, a pagan god, and decided that Christ was risen from the dead on a Sunday, that Sabbath should be a Sunday because it's also a celebration day of when Christ was raised from the dead. And so if some of you are trying to go, I have a friend that's a Seventh-day Adventist and they slow down, they don't do anything on Saturdays. If you think about maybe a Jewish friend that's still trying to live into Old Testament commands, it's a Saturday. What's so great about trying to think how the world lives and models, many of us just are still at the beginning point of we can't even find 5 hours to set aside for God, much less arguing about which day is actually the right Sabbath. So I think in a lot of ways, if you're trying to figure out what day's my Sabbath, and by the way, I'm married to a nurse, and every 2 weeks she has to work a weekend. I'm a pastor. The evenings, Friday, Saturday, weddings or memorials, and work on Sunday. But my wife and I have had to fight for what it looks like to really guard and protect a Sabbath. Because in the giving, serving world of a nurse that my wife does, and the giving, serving world that I am as a pastor, if we don't get renewed, you don't want the sassy, grouchy, yucky that my wife and I bring to the world if we don't get time with God. And by the way, you all are in the same boat. Do you know your family will like you better if you actually find Sabbath rest? You know your colleagues at work will probably be inspired by you if you get Sabbath rest. Do you realize the difference that you're trying to make in the world could be radically changed if you find who you are in God first before you ever try to do everything on your own? Listen to this really key point that will probably help you wrestle with this a little bit. Sabbath is this: it is learning to admit and confess we are not in control. I know a lot of you will say you believe that to be true. I say it all the time, but my actions don't always show it. How are we going to slow down so that we are not people that are running around and suffering from HFS? You're like, what's HFS? I read this from an author this week. Hero fatigue syndrome. We got any heroes out there that are so tired of saving and ruling the world? You don't have to. Take a Sabbath. Or maybe I'll change it. What if we called it CFS, Christian fatigue syndrome? I don't know if you've ever read this before, but do you know that the scriptures never say that we're supposed to save the world? That's God's job. And if I sit in a Sabbath and I sit with my God, I probably start to become aware that God cares about the things I care about way more and even knows how to navigate them. So I should take my cues from God on how to live into them. All these things are really encouraging because we have verses like this. We've been studying 1 Peter recently, and in 1 Peter 5:7, it reminds us God cares for us. The passage says he cares for you. In Hebrews chapter 5, we also hear some amazing stuff where it says, do everything possible to enter into this Sabbath rest. It changes everything. It makes us different people. Here's the second point I want you to think about as you try to reorient your week maybe. It's this: establishing rhythms of work and rest could change everything. Remember this. Remember a 6-to-1 ratio. Nobody in here is more special than anybody else. I don't care how strong you think you are. You're not a 14-to-1. You're not a 21-to-1. And you're definitely not a 28-to-1. God has built us, and the DNA of all of creation is 6 days of busy work, frantic, food on the table, laundry, pay the bills. What does one day of delight, joy, celebration look like? It's really fun. In between the two gatherings, I had somebody come in and go, Woody, I feel kind of guilty. Is it okay to ride my bike? And I went, oh man, if I made you feel guilty, that was not the intent. I said, let me ask you a question. When you ride your bike, do you experience the joy of what God has done for you in creation? Is it fun for you? Do you get to see the birds like singing? Do you feel like you're in a Disney movie and they're flying above your head? Are you taking in the sunshine? Are you just enjoying the moment? They're like, absolutely, it's an e-bike. I'm like, okay, that's Sabbath rest, right? Here would be the difference. If this person asked me, is it Sabbath rest if I ride my bike? And I asked a question and the answer was something like this, I have to ride 20 miles every day. My muscles are sore. I hate it, but I'm gonna grind through it. I gotta do it. No, that is not Sabbath rest. Sabbath rest is gonna look different for all of us. And I tried to come up with some really practical things for you to think through a little bit. I think coming up with a plan is the only way for it to happen. If you have a family, if you live in an apartment, if you have a roommate, if somehow those of you that live together can't try to designate when something is, you guys are gonna run all over each other and no one's gonna get a Sabbath. And I know that is so hard in the busy world that we're in, but planning for a Sabbath makes a difference. Coming to church and worshiping together, yes, that's one piece of it, but that's not the whole of it. I promise you can't get up in the morning, go to church and go, yes, Sabbath is done. Now I gotta go make money or I gotta do errands or I gotta do this, and this. There's something about settling every part of your heart, body, mind, and soul, and it takes planning. I think doing something with your phone, turning off a TV. By the way, some of us have Magnolia Place on 24/7 or diners, dives and drive-ins, or the news, and everything that is shaped inside of us is because a TV's just on all the time. By the way, if you watch diners, dives, and drive-throughs, I think you gain weight just watching it, right? If you just see tri-tip, and more tri-tip, you just get unsatisfied. And so that's not a good Sabbath show for me because God has given me more than enough and I need to celebrate and enjoy that. I think your phone's being turned off. Do you know it's okay if you have some friends that go, I texted you, why didn't you text me back? Hey, I am human. I'm trying to slow down. I did a Sabbath. I got to you when the sun went down. It's okay. It's okay because you were trying to get to a place where you're letting God. And then let me throw this one in here. Yes, Sabbath naps are real. If any of you feel like a weakling because you take a nap, you're not. But let me give you a suggestion on a nap. If you're exhausted from a busy week and it's a Sunday afternoon, or maybe some of you need to do Sabbath on a Saturday because you have a different schedule or a life that is busy because of a job that has weekend shifts. Do you know there's something powerful if at the beginning of the nap you do something like this? God, I am so tired, and if I'm honest, my mind is still racing. I give you everyone and everything. I can't do it all on my own. Do you know I dream differently when I do that? I'm being really serious. And if I wake up unsettled and chaotic and I'm trying to go back to sleep, hey God, my heart has still not settled down. I give you everything and everything. Help me to rest peacefully. There's something powerful in a nap. There are 100 other things that I could tell you, but don't have the time. And what I want to do is just make sure that you have permission to figure it out yourself. Here's a great quote that will get to the point of what we're describing here. Wayne Mueller says this, if we do not allow for a rhythm of rest in our overly busy lives, illness becomes our Sabbath. Accidents become our Sabbath. All these things, all these types of things will create and demand a Sabbath. Remember the grapevine? Remember the car with the radiator light coming on, overheating? Eventually, our bodies are designed like a car and they just give up and stop. Don't allow that to happen. Receive the rest that God's given. I have a screen for you to take a picture of. There are some amazing Psalms that I love. In Psalm 37, there's language that talks about committing, trusting, delighting, and then resting in the Lord. That's Psalms 37. In Psalm 46, the beginning of Psalm 46 talks about God is our refuge and our strength. And then it goes on a couple verses later and it says, be still. I wish it said, be Sabbath-like. Be still and know that I am God. And then Psalm 24, where it talks about having clean hands and a pure heart. Do you know I don't think we can have clean hands and a pure heart until we finally gotten to the point where we don't let there be any other idols in our lives? Just like Egypt, there are things that want to master you and me today. So we run errands for it. So we're bogged down by it so that we go to sleep thinking about it. We wake up thinking about it. You are to be free in God. Do not be mastered by anything. One last thought for you. Our choices with Sabbath keeping not only impact us, but everyone around us. 2 quick thoughts. If you are a family member of any kind and live with others, how you choose Sabbath impacts everything. My wife and I realized that when our kids were in high school and we were running crazy and getting good grades and doing club sports and everything else, my wife can remember a moment where one Sunday afternoon, after running 14 days in a row, 20-some games, homework, lunches, food, and everything else, that she paused and looked around and went, why does every parent here look miserable and praying their kid will lose so they could go home and actually have an afternoon? And while sports and clubs and all that stuff, if done correctly, doesn't have to master and ruin you, the temptation is for it too. When Deuteronomy said, and don't cause your kids to work, don't cause the foreigner to work, don't cause anybody that should be working for you. Do you realize not only how we do Sabbath, but how we look to others to do Sabbath? I've had different people do work for us at our house because I'm not smart enough to fix some things. And every time I end up in a scenario where somebody says, hey, wasn't able to finish it, I'll be back on Sunday. I hesitate to tell you this because I don't want it to feel like I'm not trying to highlight myself. It's just a deep conviction that God gave me an idea for, and if I could pass it on to you. I have said to workers before, I know you need to make money, but I want you to rest. I get vacation time. I don't know if you get vacation time or not. I will pay you for Sunday, but please don't come back until Monday and I'll pay you then as well. Do you realize how we live and act also impacts how other people will Sabbath or not? Parents, you choose how your kids will Sabbath. Employers, you choose how your employees will Sabbath. God has called us to something radical. I got 2 sets of books I want to recommend to you, and then we're gonna do some sweet Sabbath prayer over you. 3 books I've mentioned today. Each of these have a great chapter on Sabbath. If you're like, I need a quick read, just buy one of these 3 books and just read a chapter on Sabbath. But if you want a deeper dive, like what is a Sabbath meal? What is a celebration? What does it mean to have an empty chair in the middle of your house on Sabbath to remind you that God wants to come be with you? Or what does it mean to light a candle at the beginning of Sabbath and have it burn all day long so you remember God's presence is filling your home? That these 2 books are a deeper dive into what Sabbath is. But this is what I want to do with you to end today. I want to pray a Sabbath prayer over you. And I want to read it first. So if you look to the screen, we're going to put up this Sabbath prayer. I'm going to read it over you and allow you to see it so you know the words. And then the second time, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. I'm going to pray it over you. This is a Sabbath prayer. May this day bring Sabbath rest to your heart and your home. May God's image in you be restored, and your imagination in God be restored. May the gravity of material things be lightened and the relativity of time slow down. May you know grace to embrace your own finite smallness in the arms of God's infinite greatness. And may God's word feed you and his spirit lead you into the week and into the life to come.